I don't like Grummz, and I think it's time to talk about why. There is no denying at this point that Gamergate 2 has been a complete and total failure. Far more so than the original Gamergate, which I would say was very highly successful in exposing game journal corruption and kind of showcasing everything wrong with video game journalism at the time. Now, unfortunately, the movement declined in relevancy as it became more about the stupid personalities and the grifters, right? It became the sector, and everybody just kind of forgot what was really important, right? Because what they really wanted was to make themselves famous and weren't really interested in addressing the real issues with game journalism and correcting it, right? This goes to everyone involved, Ethan Ralph, Shoe on Head, especially Mr. Medicare, right? The sector was a complete failure from the get-go, right? Never should have been allowed to exist. We should have condemned the people like Mr. Medicare who tried to like avoid all responsibility, like, oh, I just want to talk stupid shit on the internet. Like, no, you should have. People really should have given him more shit for that, right? That was completely irresponsible, and as a result of that, Gamergate completely fell apart. Now, the thing about that is the issues that were brought up during Gamergate, the fact that game journals are corrupt, they can't be trusted, right? Those aspects were fundamentally true. So even without a movement behind it, Gamergate lived on, right? People began to address like issues they had with major releases like Destiny and Evolve and Horizon Zero Dawn, right? Culminating in the release of The Last of Us Part 2, which was so poorly received that it led to the game bombing and in a lot of ways kind of ruining the narrative that Sony had spent like the past 20 years building up. Like this idea that the PlayStation console had good exclusives, right? The Last of Us Part 2 killed all that, even with all the game journal support and praise and propaganda, right? Now, I would argue that if it wasn't for the fact the game was leaked, game journals would have had a lot more success in damage controlling the game. But let us not mince words here. The Last of Us Part 2 was a failure, and Sony and the game journals have never, ever been able to recover from this, right? Like, this is a fundamental truth is that people are more and more ignoring Metacritic scores, ignoring game journal opinion, right? They're just watching the Nintendo Directs and buying what they want to play, right? It is getting increasingly difficult to assign a score to a game and get people to care or lose interest because of that score, right? Game Informer is bunk now. They were one of the biggest like anti-Nintendo propaganda outlets ever, right? Like again, we have made major strides in diminishing the influence of game journalism in recent years. So, what is the problem with Mark Kern, right? To me, it seems like Mark Kern is a new generation grifter, right? Someone with real clout in the industry because he worked on one of the most overrated video game titles of all time, World of Warcraft, right? He is a corporate guy that was pushed out and he decides that in order to keep himself relevant, to keep himself talked about, that he's going to latch on to the Gamergate thing, right? He's going to grift off of people's frustrations with the gaming industry. Now, this is nothing new, right? We saw the Days Gone guy do something similar, but what makes Mark different is that he is willing to step outside the bounds of his own game and start addressing things that he doesn't have the slightest clue about. Right now, a complete list of all the things he's gotten wrong over the past several months would be too comprehensive for this, and I really don't care. Right, but the long and short of it is that Mark Kern, Grummz, pushed a narrative forward that Nintendo was being heavily influenced by DEI, right? He tried coming up with some narrative that like Doug Bowser released an email, mourning the death of George Floyd or something, and tried to make it out as if Nintendo was completely compromised by SJW cucks. completely unaware that Nintendo of America has no real power over the company. They can't really do anything besides make weird localization decisions that most serious fans don't really pay attention to anyway, right? How many people have you seen seriously refer to Juniper as non-binary, right? How many people even remember ACT exists, right? How many people more people than ever refer to Vivian with male pronouns because Nintendo of America tried to pretend he was a tranny, right? Again, all their attempts at subverting the original material have failed, right? It is very difficult to incorrectly localize a game that does not have that much text. Okay, and we've been seeing this a lot lately with all the weird things they've done. None of it's gonna stick long term, right? Again, I'm not saying the people at Nintendo of America aren't woke retards. The issue is that Grummz's claim was that Nintendo was going to be infested with DEI imminently. And we've realized over the past several months that that wasn't true at all, right? They've taken steps to prevent BlackRock from acquiring new stakes in the company, right? There have been significantly less they-thems in games in the past year. And it does feel as if in general that the woke thing is dying off anyway. So the idea that Nintendo would jump onto the trend 10 years late, after everyone's gotten sick of it and after it's been proven to lose everyone money, it's just ridiculous, right? It's just not going to happen. It's safe to say at this point. But Grummz and his disciples, people like Sean Malmstrom, they really, really push this narrative because I think they really, really want Nintendo to fail. This is the fundamental thing that's driving all of these third-party studios, all of these companies, all these corporations. They can't stand the fact that Nintendo is more popular than they are. And so they have to do this thing every single time to try and make Nintendo look evil, right? They have to straight up make things up about the company, right? We're seeing this a lot now with the Power World lawsuit, actually, which Grummz did comment on, which is one of the reasons I'm making this video now. We saw this with Grummz in regards with the Power World lawsuit. Nintendo's just jealous of Power World. They're just trying to take down a competitor. They're abusing the Japanese legal system and going after these independent developers, right? Completely unaware of the fact that Power World did plagiarize Pokemon. There is likely Pokemon code in that game, and the patent lawsuit is meant to prove that in court, right? But no, Grummz, the vast majority of Western cocksuckers in the industry, immediately sides with Power World, right? They immediately side with Pocket Pair. Why? Because they need Nintendo to look bad in order to keep themselves relevant, right? They need this to happen in order to successfully grit because they know that negative news about Nintendo is going to get them attention, right? And again, it's remarkable how quickly Grummz is willing to make these ludicrous claims about the company with no real evidence or anything backing up his claims at all, right? You can say that well, look at all these people on Twitter shilling for Power World, but the majority of them look like bots. A lot of them are just rabid Pokemon haters that don't care about Power World anyway, right? And none of them know anything about Japanese copyright law. None of them are involved in the case. So why exactly would you look at English Twitter speakers as a viable source of information as to what's going on with the Power World lawsuit? If you look into it even a little bit, like I have, you would know that these people are grasping at straws and are desperate to downplay the fact that Pocket Pair is completely fucked, right? There is no way that they are going to get out of this unscathed, right? There is no hope for recovery. They are completely done. And right now, we're seeing a lot of people just religiously fighting against the idea. They don't like the idea of Nintendo demolishing one of the games that was meant to overshadow them this year. The game, I would argue. I think out of everything that's come out this year, it was most imperative for Power World to be successful, right? Imagine how embarrassing it's going to be for Jeff Keighley to go up on the Game Awards show and try and talk about Power World when they're going through a plagiarism lawsuit. Like, what's he going to do? Like, is he going to try and show Power World again? Is he going to try to openly show his contempt for Nintendo? Like, no, like, he's not going to be able to do that. He's just going to have to awkwardly not bring it up, just like he did trying to do with Hogwarts Legacy last year, right? But again, like this was the game that was meant to destroy the Pokemon IP. That's why it became popular. That's why so many people shilled it. It's why so many people are defensive about it, right? They really, really want Pokemon to fail, even if their narratives don't make any sense. Even if the game itself is not good, that's the big takeaway I want to emphasize when it comes to grifters like Grummz, people like Rage and Golden Eagle, people like Learning the Law, or like any of these other like censorship like Twitter accounts, right? Like any of the anti-woke community, right? These people are not interested in playing good video games. Because if they were, they would have realized that Nintendo was better than the rest of the industry a long time ago. But instead, what they try and do is like lump Nintendo in with Sony and Xbox when they have none of the same problems, when they do have long running series that have remained consistently high quality, when they don't have woke content, when they have been putting out new IPs and great successful new hardware and have been like respecting the developers. Like, how many times did we hear during like the Baldur's Gate 3 hype cycle, like, oh, Swen knows how to treat his team. Like, oh man, he's never gonna work with Wizard of the Coast again because they mistreated the team. Like, oh, like Nintendo treats their teams better than Swen does, right? Again, like all that praise you saw for Baldur's Gate 3, like, oh, Swen doesn't work his employees to death. Like Nintendo does that too. Like again, all the hype for like CD Projekt Red and Larian and BioWare back in the day, right? Nintendo was doing the same thing but better, right? Like there was no reason to ever worship these developers like the Western video game world did. But they did anyway, and they completely ignored the vastly superior games on Nintendo consoles. Like if anything, the fact that we're talking about like a World of Warcraft developer is a really good indication of just the quality of person we're talking about, right? Because World of Warcraft was not that impressive. It is not that impressive now, right? The game was addicting. It had no real point to it. It was just something for nerds to just run around in endlessly and just explore a world and just not live real lives, right? Again, that kind of sums up how I feel about like the DEI crowd right now. Reddit groups like Otaku in Action, people like Grummz, like a lot of his followers, right? Like people are more interested in crying foul about Nintendo than actually playing games. Actually enjoying the hobby, right? There is no denying that Nintendo is the best video game developer in the world right now and has been for the past 40 years, right? Like no competition at all in that regard. And yet people like Grummz are seriously going to sit there and say Nintendo is going woke or that they're abusing their power. People like Sean Malmstrom will try and seriously tell you that Nintendo has weak intellectual IPs, after putting out a highly successful adaptation of the Mario movie and after the success of all these other franchises, right? Again, the hatred towards Nintendo is just a giant cope, right? It is a shield from their own failures, right? And we are going to see that, I think, going forward, is that like Grummz is not going to stop accusing Nintendo of doing illicit things in order to make himself look better, right? They all do it because they have no real talent of their own. They have put out absolutely nothing of value in the gaming industry. They never will put out anything of value in the gaming industry. And all they can do is just sit on Twitter and whine, cry, and complain about a far superior video game developer.